Thank you. So about 18 months ago, I was planning my journey to Bhutan, and I put together all of my teaching materials that I would be using at the Gaeddu College of Business Studies, and I sent them off to the president of the university and said, all right, how does this look? Tell me your thoughts. Is this a good plan? And typical American, it was probably a 2-page email and 12 attachments. I don't know, lots of stuff. And he writes back, anything is fine. Just remember, advanced GNH. Oh my, a smarter person might have run in the other direction, but being an academic, I set to work. So I started looking and getting my hands on anything I could from the Royal University campuses and looking at syllabi and trying to figure out how people were bringing GNH into the classroom. And unfortunately, I didn't find much. So that was really the genesis of my talk today. And I was looking at how do I bring GNH into the classroom, because obviously, absolutely, this is a wonderful program, and education needs to role model GNH thinking and implementation. The work I'm going to talk to you about today has two different aspects. The first aspect looked at outward expressions of GNH as communicated through structure, and the second aspect looked at levels of perceived understanding of GNH. That first aspect, the outward expressions of GNH, what I chose to do after I couldn't find anything really in the syllabi or the classroom level for the university structure, I looked at the vision, the mission, the program, and objectives. And on the left side of each table, the vertical column of each table, the first one on your left has the principles of development for Bhutan. And the bottom one has profit orientation or shareholder orientation. And I had two independent researchers tabulate instances of any of those elements that came through the vision, the mission, or the program and objectives. And as you can see, the numbers are pretty close. There's only about a 9% difference. 30 for the principles of development, 27 for what we would consider more Western approaches to business, profit maximization orientation. Now, while that's interesting and pretty good, I was pleased with that. I was pleased with the idea that both orientations seem to be well communicated at the top level. And I think they do have to coexist. They have to both be there as we teach our business students. Now, the other thing, and I tabulated these numbers from the two campuses, two of the RUB campuses and one private campus. And the interesting thing, though, is the similar numbers were arrived at with only 2 parameters for Western methodology and 5 parameters for GNH or principle of development. That means if we're communicating both fairly equally, 5 versus 2, maybe there's a way or an avenue for promoting a little bit more heavily the principles of development in the structure of the RUB or educational system within Bhutan. The second aspect of the study looked at levels of perceived understanding of GNH for my business students, because I thought these are our students that we're putting out, preparing to be the next business leaders of Bhutan. And I wanted to get an idea of where they were and what they were thinking. So the first 3 questions really speak to the first principle of development, which is economic self-reliance. And unfortunately for me, what those first 3 questions communicated was the status quo, the idea that most of my students were looking to graduate and go to work for the government. Now, the one other thing I didn't tell you is I was teaching entrepreneurship. So again, a smarter person might have run the other direction, because I thought, oh, I'm facing 120, 140 students that do not have much interest in being an exporter or being an entrepreneur. They're looking to go to work for the government. And that doesn't really fit with the principle of economic self-reliance, where Bhutan is trying to go in the government not being the primary employer in the country. I'm going to skip one. I'm going to go down to principle 3, which is free movement of factors of production. And I used questions 4 and 6 and 5 and 7 to look at that principle of development. So 4 and 6, where do you prefer to work after graduation, and if you were to start your own business, what area of the country would you want to work in? I had the students answer by city, and then I grouped the cities by 3 different regions, meaning central, western, or eastern Bhutan. And I think the results of this were interesting because under the principle of development of free movement of factors of production, the idea is that development, jobs, population would be evenly distributed throughout the country, not massed together in a couple of cities. And these questions or these answers really showed to me that the students preferred the same thing. They would prefer to be able to go back to a home village or go to someplace other than just Thimphu to work, but then you compare it to 5 and 7, and where do you believe you will need to live, and if you were to start your business, where would that need to be, showed something completely different than what they preferred. So although there would be the desire to implement principle of development number 3, it doesn't look like the students actually expected that to be possible as of yet. Then looking at principle number 4, which is community empowerment. I'm not really going to talk about that right now because I think community empowerment flows very easily from free movement of factors of production, that once students or businesses spread out throughout the country, you also see that community empowerment coming through within the business arena. Well, let me go back, actually. The last question on here, how important is recycling and being green for a business? As you can see, overwhelmingly, Likert scale 1 to 5, 4 and 5 being very important, 82%. Great number, exactly what I would have expected. Now, question 9 and 10, I actually asked of 31 different business people that were already in business, had a successful business, and I said, does your business recycle? Do you engage in environmental preservation? And remember, this was exploratory research. What I was trying to do is just come up with patterns and be able to draw from the patterns theory that I could test and go forward with. So just at an exploratory level, asking 31 business people. And those numbers actually surprised me. But I think they're, in a way, some of the most interesting in that unsure, the percentage that said unsure. Do you engage in environmental preservation? To be unsure of whether or not they engaged in it, I wasn't really sure if they just didn't want to say no, that they would be embarrassed or feel bad about that, or if they really weren't sure. And I think that gets at the crux of what I'm trying to say in terms of, are we bringing GNH into our curriculum, into especially our business school, and training our future business leaders? Maybe they're unsure because they just really don't know how to go about environmental preservation for their business model or for their small business. And does your business help to preserve Bhutanese culture? Again, a very high percentage that said unsure, and I found that intriguing. Not sure that I can stand here and analyze exactly what that means, but again, very interesting. Questions 11 and 12 were asked of the 100 plus students and the businesses alike. Can you name the pillars and domains of GNH, and can you name the principles of development of Bhutan? Now, principle number 4 and 5 are community empowerment and cultural preservation. And I was actually very surprised. Again, maybe a naive Westerner. I thought, wow, I've been reading about Bhutan, and before I came here, I'm sure I knew everything I could possibly know about GNH because this is the most amazing thing in the world. And then to have no one within Bhutan be able to tell me if they knew or could name the pillars and the domains and the principles. And the response I kept getting was, it's just the way we live. It's Bhutanese, it's how we live. And while I understand that, I do think there's a gap because we aren't seeing the way you live interpreted in the way you do business. And that's why we're here, and that's why we're having this conversation. So at some point, we have to bring that to the educational level of Bhutan so that when people do go into business, or they are the employees in the business arena, that they can actually articulate not just what the principles of development are, but how they can actualize the principles of development into their business, into their day-to-day activities. I'm not going to go into all of these items about how to bring GNH into education. I don't know that I have all of the answers, other than I feel like it's an important step. It's the next step that we need to accomplish. But our curriculum needs to be very purposeful. We saw in aspect 1 that at the top level, at the vision, at the mission statement, we were incorporating the principles of development, but we weren't bringing them into the classroom in a very purposeful manner. They weren't being articulated in our classroom setting or in our syllabi in a way that students could take with them once they graduated. And the one thing I want to mention, on-the-job training, number 3, the third mark there, embrace on-the-job training. And I may be wrong, but I put a note on there because I think it's similar to what Dr. Claire Brown talked about yesterday about looking at what the worker knows. And the idea that educating the future business leaders on how to be more GNH conscious does not have to happen just at the university level. There is an element, there is a place for on-the-job training. Germany has an amazing internship and apprenticeship program. And I'm a university professor. I'm not trying to talk myself out of a future job, but maybe all of our students, all of our citizens do not necessarily have to go to university. Maybe there is another educational structure which can form and influence the future of GNH in business. I was in Washington, D.C. last week and had the pleasure of hearing Paul Romer, who's the chief economist at the World Bank, speak. And he said, depriving someone of work is the same as depriving someone of education. And I think it ties into that same idea of on-the-job learning and looking at alternatives of education. Again, just some thoughts. I'm going to only highlight a couple. While yesterday we heard amazing information and wonderful ideas about the proposed GNH certification process, there was one word that I found troubling, and that word was if. So businesses can choose to engage in the certification process if they want. And I'd like to challenge us to think about an alternative where it's required. GNH reporting could be required just as we require tax reporting. So all you accountants out there are probably rubbing your hands together in glee, but, and then also using the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and programs within academia that are already in place to promote the SDGs. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel to bring GNH into our curriculum, because there are a lot of programs out there. There are a lot of professors and academic programs that can offer us the ability for replication at our levels here with the Royal University or any university system within Bhutan. I'll leave you for about 10 seconds to read this quote because I love this quote.
So about 2 minutes, 15 seconds, please.
Read my quote. So I love this quote and I couldn't agree with it more. And the focus on education. When you think about where Bhutan has come, since 1968, I believe it was, when the first 20 Bhutanese graduated high school, and the idea that we have the top students coming to these different campuses throughout the country and being educated, not just at an undergraduate level, but at a master's level, I think we have the whole structure in place to incorporate very, very easily GNH into our business campus, into our business education, and thereby influence the next generation of leadership in Bhutan. So thank you.